Isn't
and
that
and
funny
and when
though that
yeah.
like you say, when you have an aha experience, now you've left the church, supposedly the Holy Ghost has also left, and you have no ability to get any kind of inspiration, and yet I have had so many. Uh, I've had probably more experiences since I've left where I have really felt like there was some kind of divine intervention. And I don't even care what that is, but it's no different than when I was, I mean, I don't remember having huge uh, experiences,
Mhm.
faith and light, but I do remember having divine intervention, and it's the same.
Yeah.
It hasn't changed at all. But now for some reason, I feel more warm and fuzzy when it
Mm.
happens because it lets me know that it's about me and my relationship with nature or the divine of whatever that is. And so I feel more grateful for
Mm.
it.
Welcome to the podcast, everyone. My guest today, you might recognize, is another podcast host from the Mormon Discussions umbrella. It's René Stillman, and she is the host of the She Became Visible. Is that right?
That's correct.
What I've done with other guests is like, give me your like 2-minute Mormon story, which is like
Okay.
impossible, but yeah, get the
That's
idea.
perfect, Marty. Thank you. Well, I'm so glad you invited me to be on your podcast because I think it's really important to really let people know that you and I are under the umbrella of Mormon Discussions. And we've been here since Bill opened it up to encourage more female voices. And I'm just so honored to be a part of that whole umbrella. I don't really have a big Mormon story. I have more of a Methodist story because my family, my mom had 7 siblings. There were 8 kids in her family. They were just a good old Midwest Methodist family. And so we grew up kind of doing the typical Christmas, Easter, occasional church, but we said grace over our meals. I said my prayers every night, but they were a rote, now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. Amen. And bless, O Lord, this food to our use and us to thy service, and make us ever mindful of the needs of others. That was our blessing that we all said over our food. But I had pictures of Jesus in my room, and I had an uncle that died during World War II, but he had really been thinking about possibly becoming a priest or a pastor. So God was a big part of my life, but there wasn't. I mean, I grew up with my dad and his siblings played poker whenever we got together. They drank beer, they smoked. And I just grew up with really wonderful, loving, kind, God fearing people. So my mom, though, decided that she was looking for something. She just felt like she was missing something. So when the missionaries knocked on our door, my mom and my stepdad, my parents had gotten divorced. They took the discussions, and it took them a while. They weren't baptized immediately. My stepfather was from England, and so he smoked and he drank wine on occasion. He wasn't a big drinker, but and he grew up in the Church of England, and it just didn't matter to him. It wasn't that big of a deal. He wasn't really looking for anything, but he loved my mom. And being British, he just didn't want any contention in the home. So he was like, if you would like to be baptized, I will be baptized as well, So that was kind of his mindset. And so I was 12, and my little brother my half brother was only 4, and my older brother was 15. And so my older brother and I were baptized, but of course at 15, he was like, yeah, I'm not doing this. And he went to live with my dad. He went to live with my biological dad because my mom became very Orthodox Mormon quite rapidly. And he was like, yeah, I'm not, this is not for me. I'm out of here. 15-year-old boy. So, but integrated into the church quite easily because I was a girl, and it was fun, and I had girlfriends at church, and the church back in the 60s was road shows, dance festival, Relief Society bazaars. It was such a social world, and it was just heaven. Girls camp, everything about it was just heaven. And so I really went about it as more of a huge, just fun. This was so fun. Girls camp was so fun, and dance festival was at the time, it was a big deal. I mean, I grew up in just south of Chicago, and dance festival meant that we flew from Chicago to Utah and performed on the University of Utah football field. I mean, that was a big deal. And, youth conference was you got in the car and you drove to Indiana and you stayed in college dorms. And so everything was just such a big deal. And, as I got older and my kids were growing up in the church, I could see how it shrunk down to everything was ward level, youth conference, everything was ward level or local level. And so I kind of grew up in the Camelot era. And I also,
Where
I
did you
rela-
raise your kids? Was it in Utah, or is this?
no, we raised our kids primarily in Oregon.
Okay.
My dad got transferred to Washington State my senior year in high school. And honestly, thank heavens for the church, because you know how no matter where you go in the world, there's your people, right? So we move
Yeah.
into Washington State, and we move into our ward, and there's 3 girls in the ward that are my age, and there's my automatic friends, built-in friends. Now, they all 3 went to a different high school than I did. So that was weird. So they went to another high school, and I did make a couple of friends, but not, but my friends from church were the ones that I went to church dances with every Friday and Saturday and hung out at Mutual on Wednesday nights. And so you have this built-in social group, which is really fabulous for the youth. I think it's
sure.
just the best way to raise kids, honestly. So I just there was absolutely, I can't say anything bad. I had wonderful bishops. I had wonderful youth leaders. I just found everything just magical growing up. And honestly, it was just, I think, a maturity as I matured and started to really kind of look at things through more of a common sense type lens is before I started kind of going, that doesn't really make sense, but I'm okay. It's okay if it doesn't really make sense. It didn't affect me really. Like I remember having a girlfriend, and I remember she was always rolling her eyes because I would say things like, sometimes I wonder if the missionary program really isn't more about tithing than, and she would say, oh, that kind of thing. Or, they would say, I just remember so clearly sitting in that woman's broadcast when President Hinckley said, only 1 pair of earrings. And I was like, no, don't say it. Don't, because he was warming up to it. He was saying, like, for men, no jewelry. And for women, I was like, don't say it. Don't say it. I thought he was going to say no jewelry.
Oh.
But then he said 1 pair of earrings. And I was like, but I did. I took out my other 2 pairs and I was like, whatever, I always thought it was odd that you could still see the holes, so it's not whatever. So I kind of rolled my eyes at a lot of things, but it didn't change my testimony at all. I just thought, oh, these silly men, they just say the silliest things and whatever. It's not going to really affect me, I never had a problem. I had a problem with garments just from, not from a health issue, but just from a, trying to find clothing. I mean, you could find the most modest dress, sleeves down to the knee. But then like if you took a step, you could see your garments, or if you sat down, you could see your garments. And I got really frustrated with that. Just kind of like, geez, are we just supposed to be in a muumuu? What's going on? So I'd have but again, I looked at everything from a, oh, well, that's just what obedience looks like. Mm-hmm. And so I really, really had kind of a Camelot experience with the church until about 3 years ago. So Yeah.
Yeah, it worked until it didn't, huh?
It worked until I started finding out a few more things historically, and I was like, "Oh, you guys are liars." That was kind of my
Yes.
rabbit hole.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so you, was it COVID? Because 3 years ago, that's about COVID or right before COVID?
It was about 2020. It
Okay.
was, and I it's funny because I remember enjoying not having to go to church, but I don't remember using that as my time of discovery. It
Mm.
just happened to fall into I started hearing things about the CES letter, and I
Where did
finally,
you hear that? Like, I had never
I
heard of that
found
until I was actually looking for criticism of the church.
oh, is
Like,
that right?
yeah, like, I lost my loyalty to the church, and then I was like, "Okay, what else do I not know?" Because I read Saints,
Ah.
and they painted like, I read Saints, and then I read original, like, Joseph Smith papers that they sourced in
Oh,
Saints, and
yeah.
then I was like, "Well, that's not the same, this thing in
Oh,
Saints and the thing
yeah,
in the source."
yeah, yeah.
So, then I was like, "Well, um, like, okay, if they're biased, I wanna hear the other side. I know it's biased, but I just wanna
Ah,
hear it. I've
yeah,
never even heard it." So,
yeah,
yeah, I went out looking for it, and I found it took me, like, 2 seconds to find the CS letter, but I'd never heard of it before that.
yeah.
So
I wish I could remember. I wish I had a better memory because I would love to remember where I heard about it. I can't even remember how I heard about John DeLynn because I wasn't even into podcasts,
hmm,
3 years ago. I didn't really even I don't even remember. I listened to a lot of audiobooks, but I don't
mhm,
remember listening to podcasts.
yeah,
And but somehow, I don't know how, I heard about it, and honestly, I read it, and it didn't affect me at all. I remember thinking, "I don't care. So there's swords. So there's no horses. There's no
yeah,
chariots. It's just, Joseph Smith was a 14-year-old boy who saw God. What do you think he's going to say? You know what I mean? It did not bother me at all. But honestly, when I found or heard about John Dehlin, and I wish I could remember how I did, I thought to myself, as a good believing Mormon, I am going to start from the very first podcast that he ever did, and I will work my way up. Thank heavens I, did it 3 years ago, because now he's on what, 1,873 or something
are
of
you
his
still going
podcast.
strong? Have you
Yeah.
not missed an episode?
Oh, not hard. I do miss some. I don't really take in a lot of the personal stories.
Oh,
I
because
get
they
a little
do sound the
bored.
same after a while, right?
Yeah, they do, but I do listen to anything that's historical. Um, but his first, if I'm not mistaken, his first podcast was with Greg Prince, who is an active member. So I thought, this is good. This is good. And John was active at the time.
Yeah,
He
right.
had not been ex yet.
Those are actually my favorite episodes of his
Yeah.
are when he was interviewing, like, Richard Bushman and, but he had a lot, like, those
Yeah.
first there was
Yeah. Terrell
yeah.
Givens. And
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. And that's where I started. And so I remember thinking, okay, well, the church history is a little wacky, but Joseph Smith is still a prophet and the Book of Mormon is still true. And,
Mhm.
and I've heard that from so many other people. That was the beginning. That's where you start out by going, well, it's okay, but Joseph Smith was still a prophet and there's issues, but,
Mhm. Right.
but then you go down the rabbit hole. And honestly, this sounds so crazy, but the thing that was like, what was the rock in the hat?
Hmm,
And
that was your
yeah,
thing, huh?
yeah, because that is such a mystical, um, Ouija board thing that I was like, and that was my first, like, you lied.
Yeah.
I have 6 children that grew up singing Book of Mormon stories and pictures in my home of Joseph Smith translating the gold plates. And that was never taught. And any of these weirdos that were huge church history nerds at the age of 14 and they were reading it in the ensign in 1967, whatever. I'm like, whatever.
Or
I
watching South Park.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't care. I didn't watch South Park. I
No,
felt like that
I
was
was
not
just
a
joking. No, nobody
no,
watched
but
that.
yeah,
That's
well, I
what's
mean, that
funny is
wasn't
that
a
they
good
had it right.
Mormon thing to do, right? You
No.
don't watch South Park. And I didn't read the ensign. I bought it from or the, children's friend. I bought that for my kids and I didn't read the ensign cover to cover when it came. And unless I had to for a talk or something. And so the idea that it was there, and I don't know why you didn't know about it. I knew about it, and I was
I
like,
know it.
whatever, they were hiding it. Shut up.
Yeah.
But that was the biggest thing, because I think that's a big thing. I think that's the translation story is a big part of the story. And if you're lying about that, what else are you lying about? And so, of course, Rough Stone Rolling, no man knows my history, House of Females, that I just started down the rabbit hole. And also I think that I was able to separate the man from the church for modern day people like Ezra Taft Benson. My husband's mission president was Mark Benson, who was his son. And my husband loves him, worshiped him, thought he was the greatest man that ever walked the earth. And but I experienced the President Benson that told, the women to go home and don't work outside the home, and please have as many children as you can. And my husband is just a true believing Mormon who is obedient and just is willing to look past things because it's a good thing. He's one of these people that there's more good than harm, and it doesn't matter. And so, but President Benson always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And when I read Gregory Prince's book about David O. McKay, and I saw how Ezra Taft Benson treated David O. McKay and the lies that he pulled and the shenanigans that he pulled, and then how the church handled it.
Oh,
That
man.
really
I'm
was
not familiar with Greg Prince's book, so you're gonna have to
well.
fill me in a
He
little.
was he was the big communist conspiracy, which everybody was after World War II. My grandmother was civil
So
defense
that's Ezra
director.
Taft Benson.
But that's what I'm talking about. Ezra Taft Benson.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but Greg
yeah.
Prince, what was his
Oh,
book about?
Greg Prince wrote the book biography of David O. McKay,
Okay.
and
And what were the shenanigans that you were saying?
so in the biography, because he loved Ezra Taft Benson, and Ezra Taft Benson was one of the apostles, and he loved him, and he would call him in and he would say, Ezra, we got to calm down on the communism. You can't talk about this at conference. It's not the place, it's not the time. And he'd go, okay. And then next conference, the whole thing would be about communism and secret combinations and the whole bit. And they finally had to send him to Germany to get in. They thought he won't shut up, so we'll send him to Germany, and maybe then he'll calm down. And it didn't really work. And then he was also part of the John Birch Society, and David O. McKay was going downhill mentally, and he took advantage of that, and he wanted to run for vice president with can't remember his name, huge racist, can't remember his name. Anyway, he asked if he could do that, and David O. McKay said, no, you're an apostle. You can't run for vice president. And can I be the president and be the face of the John Birch Society? And David O. McKay said, no, you're an apostle. And he kind of tried to finagle and sneak David O. McKay into a John Birch Society event, or he was trying to get his photograph taken, taking advantage of his mental capability, capacity, which was degenerating. And it's all in the book. It's all in the book. And it's just like, I don't like that in a person. I think that person should be reprimanded and punished for that kind of behavior, and nothing was done. And that's probably one of my biggest things, just for example, just what's going on now with Tim Ballard and Melvin Ballard.
Yeah,
And
I can, yeah, that sounds
these
familiar.
men are just they're never held accountable for their actions. And I just don't think that's okay. And I don't go along with the fallibility thing, because I have a wonderful husband who has never started a shell company.
Right.
He's
I've heard that argument a lot for Joseph Smith. Well, you can't expect him to be perfect. I'm like,
Mhm.
yeah, but you can expect him to be better than average.
He didn't start a bank and ask people to donate all their money to him, or
Yeah.
claim that he had a revelation that you should
Yeah.
build me a house, and oh, by the way, you should mortgage your farm and give me all your money.
Yeah.
And in
He
fact, he's
seems
the
reasonable.
opposite.
If someone's a
He
prophet of God, that they're going to be cream of
Yes.
the crop and not.
Yeah.
Yeah. not
So I have a
needing.
good example of what a person with ethics actually acts like in my home. So I find this behavior unacceptable and inexcusable.
Yeah.
So I can't accept them as infallible people that make mistakes. I'm like, no, a mistake is, oh, I meant to pick you up at the airport and I totally forgot.
Hmm.
You know, that's a mistake. Or, oh, I know you told me not to eat those cookies you just baked for the, bake sale at the elementary school, but I was so hungry. That's a mistake, you
Mhm.
know? Marrying 34 women is not a mistake.
Right.
That's intentional.
Yeah.
So anyway, I resigned my membership about 3 years ago, and it was hard at first with my husband, just because he didn't know what that meant. What
Hmm.
does that mean if you're not a member? Um, but what we've really discovered is that we have the same values. Um, I don't drink. I'm not planning on having a three-way. So I mean, I haven't changed my values at all. I just changed my religious belief. And so it hasn't really affected our marriage. In fact, it's made it a little bit better because, I feel like I can be myself and I'm
So
not angry.
yeah, I did not realize you were in a mixed faith marriage. So
Yeah.
I'm curious, can you guys talk about church stuff together? Or do you find it's just best to not talk about it? Like, and if you do talk about it, how has that successfully happened?
Not successfully at all. But what's really, I think, helped is I actually introduced him to Patrick Mason because he needs to hear things from active men in the church. He would not listen to a woman. Um, but he respects a man who is an active, recognized man in the church. And so to hear Patrick Mason say that he thinks polygamy was a sin, um, is good for him. He
Mm,
accepts that. He would not accept it from me. He would not accept it from another woman. But he has found, and he goes to these Thrive events with me. And when there are respectable men who are faithful to their wives still, even though they've left the church, again, they're not doing crazy things that's like, hey, we're not members anymore, let's all go have an orgy and get drunk every weekend. He's not going to listen to anything about that. But any of the men like Anthony Miller, these men, Bill, he has a lot of respect for these men that have stuck with their values as a
mhm,
husband. So he'll kind of go, okay, well, I found out through Patrick Mason's book that not everyone practiced polygamy, that there were men that said, no, I'm not going to do that. And so that gave him a comforting feeling to know that if polygamy ever comes back, he will be able to say no. And I always say, yeah, we'll wait and see, because he's pretty obedient. And I said, I don't know. I said, I honestly, I know you think that, but I honestly think, because he is so obedient, that if some stake president or bishop that he loved said to him, Brother Stillman, I know you're 80, but these three women have been just left destitute, and you don't have to, but you're just going to have to marry them. If you could just take care of them, he'd go, okay, I'll just take care of them. He'll do, so I always say, I think they're going to bring polygamy back, because there's so many, men leaving the church, that there's all these single women out there. They're going to bring polygamy back, but I
mhm.
don't know. We'll see. He says, I
So,
don't think we need to worry about that right now. So, yeah.
so
So, yeah.
other than like when you initially left, you probably were telling him what you were doing, but as far as like how you guys live your lives, like what does that look like? He just goes to church on Sunday and you don't, and you
Yeah.
just don't talk about it? Like, is that,
Well, you know what's
or
kind of funny?
do you still have
Um,
some shared, I don't know, like do you like I don't know, like I'm just kind of curious what that looks
yeah.
like.
He has always, literally always been in some kind of position of authority. We got married 3 weeks after he got home from his mission, because I was serving in the United States Navy and was stationed in Japan. And I only could take a 30-day leave. So I either had to fly back to Oregon, date for 30 days and then go back to Japan, or we had to get married. So, we were kind of forced to get married. Because that's what they tell missionaries. Now you're done with your mission, go home and get married. And he was like, okay. And so we got married 3 weeks after he got home from his mission. He flew back to Japan with me. He was the first male dependent on base. Most of the time they're women dependents, and he was put in the branch presidency at 22 years old. He was put in the branch presidency with these other two older guys. And so he has always gone to church by himself. He got himself dressed and went to church, and I took the kids and got dressed and took them to church by myself. We've been married for 49 years. And so there were a few times when we were in the middle, in between, like maybe we're moving from one ward to another ward, where he was elders quorum president, or I think he was in the Boy Scouts for just a really short amount of time. But we were, like I said, in the middle of moving from one ward into another ward, and it didn't last very long. So he is really used to getting up and going to church by himself. And he said, I really like, at first I was going to church, but then all the way home in the car, I'd be like, I can't believe they said that. And he'd go, I kind of like it when you don't go to church with me, because then I don't have to listen to you rant all the way home. And I've gone, in the last 3 years, I've probably gone to church. Like I went on Father's Day, and I went one time when there was one of my friends, their son came home from his mission, and I went one other time. I can't remember, but I was like, I can't do this anymore. So that was nice when I finally said, don't feel like I have to go. I do say to him, I said, every once in a while, I'm going to go to church with you just to remind any of those widows that you are married. Or I will say to them, yes, Brother Stillman loves apple pie. And if you would like to bring one to the home, I would appreciate that.
I like apple pie too.
Just in case they were like, oh, that Brother Stillman, he doesn't come with anybody. Is he married? Like, yes, he is. So I just put that to rest. So I'm a little possessive. He's a good guy, but yeah.
Oh, that's good. So tell me about your podcast. So you feature women on your podcast, right? Actually, you've had some male guests too, right?
I have had Randy Bell on, but I brought on Lila Tuller, so there were 2 against 1. And all of my other guests have been female, and that was going to be my motto, was I only interview women. But I'm thinking that I think 2024, I'm going to be breaking that rule, just because there's just so much happening out there. And also someone made this very aware, and I thought, this is really brilliant. She said, you should have more men on, but have them talk about their wives and their mothers and their daughters and the women that have made such a difference in their lives. And I thought, that's a good idea. Because when I did talk to Randy Bell, I mean, his mother was amazing part of his life. And he talks about Mrs. Fender and how much she meant to him, and how she made differences in his life. So, to talk to men about how these women have really made them better men would go along with my theme.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I'm going to do.
So your topics, what have your topics been? And I guess, how does it relate to Mormonism? Or does it?
Yeah, when I first started out with Bill, I said, do does this have to be an anti-Mormon podcast? And he said, no, of course not,
Yeah.
And my goal was to just really highlight women who had reached, and you'll relate to this. It seems as though women really come together at about 42, 43. They really everything just kind of clicks into place, and they really find who they are. And they kind of start putting down some boundaries, and they start saying, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not going to accept that from you anymore, because I have figured out who I am. And I never liked doing that. I've never liked being that. And what I'd really like to do is blah, 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 or I want, And so my purpose was to interview women who really have stood up and said, hey, I'm here. I have become visible. So I started out interviewing a lot of women who were caretakers. Our youngest son was severely disabled, and I was his primary caregiver. And honestly, and my husband will be the first to admit this, is like, I always say to him, you don't have a handicapped son. I have a handicapped son. And you are a babysitter occasionally. And when you do babysit for him, you get praised as if it is the most amazing thing in the world. It's like, oh, look, Tony Stillman standing next to his son at the football game. Isn't that amazing? Oh my gosh, he's such a good father. And I'd be like, oh, please, let's talk about how that kid got to the football game. All right. And then again, I took 6 children to church by myself for all of those years, because he was always at a bishopric meeting or high council meeting or something like that. And I sat by myself. He sat on the stand. And so I interviewed a lot of women who were, the same thing, either husband left them. I had the most amazing woman, one of my podcasts. She has 3 children. They all 3 have disabilities. A couple of them are genetic, and one of them is just an autism spectrum issue. And then her husband died. And so here she is, a single mother. She went back to school. She got her teaching degree. Because of the fabulous school system in the United States, where children with disabilities, it's mandated that they also get to go to school. She was able to teach and still be a full-time mom. But that woman is, if you have any questions about where you can get help or what kind of mental help you should be getting for your child or services that are available, blah, 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 she knew every place to go. She lives back in Pennsylvania. But she was I loved interviewing her. And I also have, interviewed other women that I had one of my very first podcasts was a couple that had, again, a genetic thing that they didn't realize until their 3rd child, because it was one of those genetic disabilities that your chances are 20% or 30%. So they had a child and the child died. Then they had a 2nd child. The child had the disability. They had a 3rd child. The child did not have a disability. And so it wasn't until then that they did some testing and found out that this was a genetic disorder, and there are good chances that if they had any more children, they would have it. And so they were fabulous. So, anytime these women were given challenges and they really stood up and just, they were just overcoming these challenges and crushing it, those are the people that I had on my podcast. And then I kind of went to women who just did something as simple as say, I'm not going to dye my hair anymore. I'm just going to let it go gray. And you wouldn't think that would be that big of a deal. But honestly, these women had stories that just blew me away. I'm like, your daughter said what? Or your husband threatened to divorce you if you didn't dye your hair back? I'm like, what? Crazy stories. Or yeah, it's just amazing what women put up with. Strangers coming up to them in the grocery store saying, you'd look about 10 years younger if you dye your hair. Oh, can't believe that, So yeah, so it really got to be a very, very diverse. Just anytime women just were like, I don't care what you think, I'm letting my hair go gray, or other things where they stood up to doctors and said, I don't care what you say, there's something wrong with this kid and I need to find out what it is, So any type of a situation where the women said, I'm not listening to you, I have a gut instinct that tells me I need to do some more research. And so, but eventually I kind of gently moved on to a lot of women that had left the church and had a lot of really sad experiences with, they weren't as lucky as I was. They had husbands that were like, well, if you're not my eternal companion, I'm out of here. And left a family of 5 kids, just blew my mind.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's my theme is women that have stood up and they're not going to carry the water for the patriarchy anymore. They're going to stand up and say, I don't want to do that. I don't like that. And I'm going to start living my life differently. So that's my
Okay.
demographic.
Cool. So, how often are you publishing an episode?
I try to publish once a week.
Okay. And you're
Um,
doing them live.
I am doing
Okay.
them live. I do want to find out a little bit more tools to be able to edit because I think some of these podcasts are just so fabulous. They're like watching a freaking MGM 21st century movie. They're so
Oh,
well edited, the
yeah.
music and you know, the change of scenery and I'm like, this is like watching something in a theater. This is amazing.
Yeah.
I think it helps if you can edit it. And there've been a few times when I thought, ooh, I wish I could take that out.
Yeah.
But normally I just do it live. Yeah.
Okay. So, what when Bill Real said, "Hey, we want female voices," did you just take that and run with it, or were you already planning on doing a podcast? And you're like, "Hey, this seems like a good way to do it." Like, what made you decide to do a podcast?
Actually, I was already doing a podcast.
Okay.
I was doing the same idea with the She Became Visible, only it was called Go Gray Dame.
Okay.
And I was recording at a studio in Scottsdale because we live primarily in Arizona. And so in Scottsdale, they had a studio that you could go to, you could record, and then they would do all the editing and they would actually post it for you on all the different
Oh, cool.
Apple Podcasts and Heart Radio and Spotify or wherever else you wanted your podcast. So they would do that for you. But the problem with that is I had to have in studio guests.
Oh,
But I did
right.
some really fun ones. I had a lawyer that came in and talked right after the AP article came out about the child abuse in Arizona, and we talked about that. And I had some other guests that I had a couple of women on that were professional golfers, and it was just so it was really fun. But limiting it to people that lived in the Scottsdale area was a little bit difficult, especially when I started leaning more towards people that had left the church, ex-mos. That was drawing up my. I actually flew in a couple of guests that I wanted to have on, but I
So,
realized that I needed to learn how to do this myself because I just Zooming was the way to go.
okay. So when did you start the podcast? Was that before you left?
So I started the podcast about
The Go
three
Gray Dame
years
one.
ago, the Go Gray Dame. And
Okay.
then when I was listening to Bill and he put out the call, I was able to just send him a couple of my already done podcasts.
I see.
And so that was how I auditioned for the
Got it.
part. Yeah.
So, but that's about the same time you left, right?
Yeah, it was. That's very interesting because I was kind of going through my, but I hadn't actually left,
Okay.
Yeah. So it was, I was kind of going through a little bit of this is really bugging me type thing, but I'm still here. It's roll your eyes, but yeah, I can't even remember what the final straw was that I was like, I'm out of here.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah.
So, do you what motivates you to keep going or what to do the podcast? Is it the same thing that made you want to start? Like what keeps you going now versus like starting?
Well, I think that women especially, I think that one of the side effects of aging is your circle just kind of gets a little bit smaller. Um, because so much of your life as a young adult, you're either in college with your roommates at school or your friends at church, and then you graduate from college or you have your job and you've got friends at work that you hang out with. Then you get married and you have children, and so your friends become your mom group, the
Yeah.
play dates, the kids at the preschool or whatever. And so many of our friends that we hung out with and we had such a great time with were our other baseball moms and dads, right? Other kids on the football team. That's who we hung out with. And you hear people say, oh yeah, I was a dance dad and I hung out with all the other dance dads. And so you have all your friends that you're all going through the same season of life together. And then as you age and your kids grow up and go away, and your friends' kids grow up and go away, and then you decide to move, and now you're starting a different friend group, and your community just gets smaller and smaller. And it's so funny because now I look back and I realize all the ward activities that we went to. And I remember there'd always be like the bishop and his wife, maybe the high priest group leader and his wife, that were grandmas and grandpas, but everybody else there, they were just young families in the ward, and the kids were running all over the cultural hall. And that's who really came to all the, ward activities. Because the older you get, you're like, why would I go to a pancake breakfast at 7:30 on Saturday morning? We don't have any kids at home, and
Right.
I don't want to get up and go eat pancakes at the church. And so I really found that women need other women. And we need that conversation. We need that female conversation. I know men hate it. I know men hate the fact that women tell each other everything, but that's just how we are. And we need the sewing bees. We need the coffee clutches. We need that. And so I feel like we lose that, especially in my demographic. And so that's why I love doing the podcast, is I'm sitting here on a Thursday night talking to you. Otherwise I'd be watching another Mormonism live,
Right.
by myself.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll go through the whole day, and when I actually start to speak, I go, oh, haven't actually used my voice all day long. I haven't spoken to anybody,
Okay. So, as far as your content and how it's driven, do you ever worry that about audience capture? I don't know if you know if you're familiar with that phrase, or if
Yeah,
you're ever concerned about that. Like, so you have I'll kind of describe, I have kind of my idea of what I would like to promote, but sometimes what you want to promote and what people seem to click on is not the same.
I
And
know.
so
Yeah.
and so it's hard. I don't know if that like not being authentic to go after what people are interested in, or is it okay to cater to what people are interested in? I don't know. Have you
I
ever
know.
grappled with that
Yeah.
or thought about
Yeah.
those kinds of things?
I have, because I actually hired someone to help me with a lot of the technical stuff as far as like producing shorts.
Mm,
And because I know how important that is to have. But I was talking with him and I said, I know that shorts are supposed to be titled with some kind of clickbait. There needs to be a title on that short that's just going to grab someone. I said, but I have a hard time because I don't think they're honest. I mean, you can't
right.
say shocking news on a short. And then when you actually watch the short, it's like, yeah, I went to Target today, and I don't want that. I want everything, because that is such a big thing for me. I mean, the reason I left the church was because of the authenticity.
Mhm.
It's like, I don't want people to think that I promise this, but I'm delivering this. That's not
Right.
authentic. And I
Right.
really want everything to be authentic. I especially right now, I mean, I'm listening to podcasts. I don't know who these people are. I don't know how I found them, but they're talking about Ruby Frankie. So they're popping up on my YouTube. And, so there are trends and there are subjects that are going on that are like, yeah, I should probably talk about that because that might get me more viewers, but I don't know anything about that. And I don't
Mhm.
have, secret spies that can give me, information that nobody else knows about. But I
Or
am
maybe
interested in it.
secretively you just don't care anymore about it.
Well, I mean, I'm shocked.
Not
I'm
I'm
in the
not talking
shock and
about those
awe.
subjects. I'm just some of
Yeah.
the things that
Yeah.
become really important to people, and then it sometimes I'm done with it long before the media cycle is done with it.
Well, I don't care who Taylor Swift is dating right now. That is probably one of the things I won't be covering. But here's one of my biggest things, because I know this about myself. One of my shadow sides is I can get negative really easy.
Hmm.
And I don't want to become every single podcast is just negative Nelly, I'm
I
working
I haven't
on.
got that vibe from you at all,
Okay,
so
good.
good
That's
job.
good. Yeah. Because I don't, I do have I listened to a fabulous podcast today with Jana Reese, and I was just like, girlfriend, I don't know how long it took you to get that open and loving and space giving and gray and allowing, but that is such a beautiful trait to be able to have so much allowance for people. It was, and I've heard it before and I've seen it before, but it's something I really want to try to adopt more, to be more understanding where people are not binary. I don't know how you were raised. Were you like born under the covenant? And
Oh yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So,
It's hard to explain, like, I feel like my family was a lot more relaxed than I
mm,
became going through
mm,
the seminary and institute programs. I feel like I became more orthodox. Like,
mm.
I went through those programs going, "Oh, we didn't do family home evening every night, and
Oh,
we didn't say our family prayers every night. I need to do better with my family." Like,
oh,
that's
okay.
how. So I kind of felt like my family was a little subpar when in reality, from where I'm at now, I feel like my family was a pretty good, healthy balance of reality and still participating in a church community. Like, none of
Yeah.
my family is so orthodox. Like, for example, one of my brothers went to, I can't remember, he went outside the country, Central America, for a vacation, and, of course, they don't drink coffee, but they brought back, like, coffee beans because they were supposed to be really good for my husband because he loves coffee now. So it's like,
Oh,
so
yeah.
they're just not they're not they're not super put off by that, and I don't if that
Yeah.
makes sense. Like, they
Yeah.
want the best for us, and they understand, um, that maybe we'll be rebaptized in the afterlife. They're just not too stressed
Oh,
out about it.
that's so great. You know what's funny? If I was to, my mom thinks that she's an Orthodox Mormon. Um, she's 91, so she can think whatever she wants to. But it's so funny because as you were saying that, growing up, I remember driving into Chicago with my parents to eat at some fabulous, authentic Chinese restaurant. And I remember my mom drinking green tea. And I remember as a child being like, and she was like, "It's not the same. It's a healthy herbal thing." And I'm like, "I don't think so, but whatever." And I remember her wearing pants to church in the 70s, and when
Mhm.
pantsuits were real popular, and she had a few Relief Society women like, "Sister, we should not be wearing pants to church." And she was like, "Why not?" And so she was a lot more rebellious than she set an example for me to subliminally to not put up with stuff. I remember her yelling at my dad because he was such, like I said, such a good British man, and he'd be doing his home teaching, and she'd be like, "You said you were going to be home tonight," and she was the Sunday school president. And a Sunday we would sit around at dinner and she'd be complaining about those men that don't listen to her. And she told them who she needed as teachers and nobody would listen to her. But if I tried to bring that up right now, she would deny all of that. So
Yeah,
yeah, like
depends on who it's
you.
coming from, right?
Yeah. But so like you, I mean, we didn't have family home evening because it was just me and my little brother that was 8 years younger than I was. So how are you going to have a family home evening with basically one kid?
Yeah. Mhm.
So and they drank Diet Coke and no, we didn't have to stay. We didn't go anywhere on Sunday, but we didn't have to stay in our church clothes or anything like that. So yeah, I think that's what made it an easy transition for me. It's like I didn't grow up with all that. So I'm good.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was pretty tough transition,
Yeah.
but I'm okay. Like,
Yeah.
um, it's like one of those things was really hard to go through, but I feel like I'm a better person for it, and I survived the other side.
Did you
So,
did you and your husband go out together?
yeah, we did.
Wow. Did
So,
you both discover like who discovered something first and then said, "Hey, have you ever heard?" Or how did that
do
go?
you know, it was pretty simultaneous. I would say that I had some doubts that there are people going to church that will stay in the church forever that had the kind of doubts that I had. So it
Oh,
wasn't like I had any huge doubts. It was just like I I was uncomfortable with the level of certainty I had.
mm,
So it's hard to describe. I mean I was becoming more materialistic in my thinking, and so I was
Mhm.
kind of like, when people would tell a ghost story or something that seemed pretty fantastical, I'd be like,
Mhm.
Probably not, but that's
Yeah.
okay. You have your story, right?"
Yeah, yeah.
And um, I never really pointed it toward my beliefs in Mormonism until I was
Mhm.
listening to this podcast. It was Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris talking about truth. They were debating truth. It was like a 3-hour podcast, and they got nowhere because they couldn't get past truth.
Oh my
And
god.
I don't know why I thought of this during that podcast, but I thought of, like, do I believe that Joseph Smith had gold plates? Like, I don't know why I thought about it then, but I thought about it. Like, do I really believe that? Is that
Mhm.
true? I don't know. I don't know
Mhm.
why. Maybe that's why.
Mhm.
But anyway, I realized I didn't believe it. And then I had to grapple with that for like the next 3 years, and
Mm.
I just kind of developed a belief of there those supernatural beliefs maybe didn't happen, but the church was still good. That's how it got here. That's how
Yeah,
we got to here. So,
right.
whatever in the past. So it wasn't super important. But as I'm teaching my kids, like my oldest, I think was 8, during that time, and it became really hard for me to teach things like the plan is salvation that I felt like there was no evidence for it other than this revelation from a guy that may or may not, like, know reality, that might not be real. Like, even
Right.
the plan of salvation, which is really beautiful for a lot of people, like, that's what they love
Right.
about the church.
Right.
I had a hard time with it because I was just like, "How do we know that?" So it
Mhm.
was just
Mhm.
like, it was, like a yeah, I just didn't think that we could know those types of things, and so
Right.
I finally just talked to my husband about it, and we decided that we would try to do better with checking all the boxes, and maybe I could get my testimony back, and I was on board. And so we kind of went down that path, and it was really weird. Like, honestly, if I still kind of had that mindset of um God directing my life, I could
Mhm.
easily say God got me here. Like, I really
Mm.
do. And I do feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be, but
Right.
the way that things lined up and what happened, like, we spoke in church, and then I got a calling, and then I read Saints, and then, that's when everything collapsed.
Yeah.
So, and I wouldn't have read Saints had I not got the calling. I wouldn't have got the calling had I not spoken church. Like, it was
Isn't
just
that yeah.
things that happened that it was, yeah, bizarre.
Yeah.
But anyways, that's
Isn't
and
that
and
funny
and
though
when
that
yeah.
like you say, when you have an aha experience, now you've left the church, supposedly the Holy Ghost has also left, and you have no ability to get any kind of inspiration, and yet I've had so many uh, I've had probably more experiences since I've left where I have really felt like there was some kind of divine intervention. And I don't even care what that is, but it's no different than when I was, I mean, I don't remember having huge uh, experiences,
Mhm.
faith and like, but I do remember having divine intervention, and it's the same.
Yeah.
It hasn't changed at all. But now for some reason, I feel more warm and fuzzy when it
Mm.
happens because it lets me know that it's about me and my relationship with nature or the divine of whatever that is. And so I feel more grateful for
Mm.
it. And so, and I'm still having, thoughts I should call so and so, or I should go do this, or give that person, that thing that you don't need that anymore. And she just mentioned she couldn't find something. It's like, here, just take mine. I don't care. And
Yeah.
it's so lovely to have that feeling, knowing that I wasn't trying to convert the person, or it was just a nice thing to do.
Yeah.
But you have small children in your home, so that was a completely different scenario for you.
Yeah. And what's interesting? We'll talk about things every once in a while, and I can't believe they've just forgot it all. Like, they
Um,
just don't. They were small enough that it just wasn't that big of a deal in their life. And actually, they still go to the weekday activities. Like, I'm totally
oh,
fine with them hanging out. Our church is really close,
right.
and their friends invite them, and they want to go. They're excited for it, and so I'm okay with them going.
Yeah,
In
yeah.
fact, I feel a little guilty that I'm not helping with the activities. And so like whenever the leaders are like, "Hey, we need parents to help," I'm always like, "I'll help." I
That's
I
great.
feel really guilty. So
Yeah.
no, I feel like I don't have doubts that the church is true, but I have doubts of whether I should pass something on to my kids, my young children.
Mm.
Like I feel
Mhm.
like there's stages of life, and a lot of my kids are in a stage of life where it's totally appropriate to believe stuff like that, in my opinion.
Exactly.
And
Totally
honestly,
goes yeah, totally goes with
yeah,
the, Richard Rohr and James Fowler's
yeah,
stages of faith, and children need black and white. They need structure,
yeah,
and it works. So, yeah.
yeah. So those are some of the doubts that maybe I have about being where we're at, but there's just no way I can honestly participate um, myself. Uh,
Right.
but I don't know. One of these days, maybe I'll actually go find another church to
Yeah.
check out, and it would align better. But I just haven't made the effort. So
And
life
isn't
is
that funny
busy, and
because
we've enjoyed Sundays.
exactly. It's because I found in Arizona, I found a church just 15 minutes away, and it's a very progressive Methodist church. They have women there. It's very casual. Everybody shows up in their just casual clothes,
Hmm.
and a lot of women there. A lot of and I just started going when the snowbird thing happened. So there was a very reduced population because all the oldies had gone back to Michigan for the summer or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And but they're very accepting. They're very LGBTQ accepting, very women. They're not very patriarchal, and so I thought, well, maybe when we get back, because we're kind of trying this snowbird thing, when we get back in November, maybe I'll just start attending that every Sunday. And then I'm like, yeah, but I have that really fun F45 class that I go to at 9 on Sunday morning. I don't know if I want to give that up. So yeah, you just kind of start going, yeah, but I wanted to get a good hike in, and that starts at 9:30. So,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
that's the
And we've
problem.
we've really enjoyed, like, spending time with the kids too. We'll take them on
Yeah.
a lot of hikes and
Yeah.
backpacking, and yeah,
Yeah.
we've filled it with other things, and honestly, we'll spend time with our family too on Sundays, like a
Yeah.
extended family. So
Yeah, yeah,
anyways,
that's true. Well, it's definitely different for everyone. In my heart, out of our 6 children, um, 4 of them had left the church, and my youngest son, as I mentioned, was severely disabled, so he's just already an angel. Um, and my other daughter that's active is very nuanced and very progressive and very much, but she's got 4 kids, and like you, it's like, this is a great place for these kids. They've got good friends and good structure, and it's working well. And so far, they haven't had any kind of wacky thing where they've had to redoctrinate the kids because something wacky was said. So they're, so far so good. And it works for them. And we can talk about things. And she's like, yeah, I know, it's crazy, So she's not condemning at all. And I have good relationship with all the grandkids. And I'm very fortunate that way. I mean, I know a lot
yeah,
of people that have lost a lot to leave this, community. So
yeah,
I'm not ignorant to that, how grateful I should be that I have a great husband and great children and great grandchildren, that it really didn't change anything. Now, my kids are, like my husband said, well, what if the granddaughters, when they get married and they get married in the temple and you can't be there? And I said, for some reason, it doesn't bother me
yeah,
at
me
all.
either.
I'll be outside.
Yeah,
I'll be getting the tablecloth set up for the reception. I'm okay with it.
yeah, I've had the same
Mm,
thought. Like, I'm just
yeah,
not. In fact, I've thought, like, if they let me in there, I think it might hurt more,
yeah,
to be
yeah,
honest, to
yeah,
watch a loved one go through the ceremony and just not. I don't know. I don't like to use the C word,
yeah,
because I think it's way more complicated than that, but
yeah.
obviously there's a reason the C word comes up so much.
Mhm.
So,
And I love Lindsay Hansen Park's explanation when John Dehlin asked her about a cult, and she said, "I don't like to use that word because who am I to tell you what your experience was?"
yeah,
And I mean, I'm totally paraphrasing it, but she said it beautifully. But she said, like, if you were traumatized and you want to call it a cult for you, you're free to do that. But it's not my job to tell you what it was.
yeah,
And I thought, see, again, another person that has learned non binary thinking that I have not, uh, learned well yet, but I'm trying really hard just to kind of go, let me just think about this,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
because I grew up in a very black and white home. Like I said, very Midwestern Republican, yay Eisenhower and Nixon and very Jesus loves you and this is the way you do things. And if you don't do them, you're an idiot. I mean, I think that's my mom's family's favorite word is stupid idiot. And it was
Yeah.
like, wow, that's a very fierce emotion to have over that kid that has blue hair. I mean, wow, but
Yeah.
that's how, oh, it's stupid idiot, kid with blue hair. I'm like, Mom, I don't know if it's really that big of a deal, but when you grow up like that and then you have a church that's very black and white,
Yeah.
it's a learning process for sure.
Sure. Hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So you were saying that you've been really lucky for the people around you that you have good relationships, and I am just gonna throw this out there. I suspect that you are also easy to get along with, and you also have maybe some tips or tricks, maybe of building relationships with maybe people you don't agree with. I don't know. Like, do you feel like you have any words of wisdom there?
You know, no, I don't. And I'll tell you why. I have a good girlfriend that just again became a very right-wing Republican, very Trump-loving person. And I just I mean, the last few, year or so, I was kind of like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. So it's kind of like I'm trying to listen to these people that go, we can still be friends. I'm like, yeah, but you're wrapped up in a flag, and I don't know if you have a MAGA hat on. I don't know if I can do that.
Hmm.
So I really honestly, it's funny because I really don't care. Like, for example, here's an example. I am an interior designer. I love it, right? Fashion and design are just my passion. I absolutely love it. I couldn't care less what you do with your house, right? So when I would go over to people's homes, they would go, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I know I should probably do something, and don't look at my bedroom." And I'd be like, "I don't care. I really don't care what people, how they want to live their life or do their thing, because it's kind of like." It's my thing. It's my thing that I love, and I don't care what you do. So that is one thing that I will say I have never really had a hard time with when it comes to the black and white thing. For example, I remember one time my one of my sons, he just, he didn't date a lot, and he he's very shy and very introverted. And my mom said, what would you do if you found out that he was gay? And I said, that would be fabulous. I would love that. And this was years ago. And she was like, oh, you would allow someone that didn't love Jesus in your home? And I was like, okay, I don't know how those correlate, but yes, I would. And our oldest son, I love him because he's so much like me. He's just impulsive and crazy, and I love him for that. And he drove everybody crazy. And I would get phone calls from the school, we can't find him, or he just did this. And I'm like, oh, well, that's so I'm very accepting really of you do you. I'm good with that. As long as you don't start saying really silly things like, against, like we have a young man that helped us with our son before he passed away. Amazing, amazing young man that's over here from Mexico City on a student visa. And this man works harder than anybody I know. And I've watched what he has gone through for 7 years to try to get a worker's visa and immigration rights. And so I am violent against people that just blase come up with some easy trail that they think it is to get immigration or something like that. So I'm pretty much you do you and I'll do me, unless you start saying really silly things like they just have to go back to Mexico, fill out an application, they'll be back. I'm
Hmm.
like, I'm not doing that one. So it depends. It just depends on what the subject is.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I
So
appreciate you get taking the time. I think this was fun.
So fun.
And so now, any of my listeners can get an idea of what they're in for, and they can go check out your podcast.
Oh, that
Do
would be
you
so fabulous.
do you have any favorite podcasts, or
One of my,
what are like the most listened to? And then
yeah, one of my favorite ones that really has kind of just stuck with me, and I need to figure out how to get her back on. I interviewed a fabulous woman from Canada that in herself has the most amazing story. Her and her husband went on a mission to South Africa, and like the day they arrived in South Africa, their mission president picked them up, and on the way to the mission home, they were in a horrific car accident. And yet they stayed, they finished up their mission. She talked about the pain they went through, how they were treated. She talked about how what kind of insurance the church gives senior missionaries, which was just another eye-opening, for me. I'm like, I had no idea that you had to buy insurance and then they were in South Africa, so there was a national health care program, and they didn't cover that. Blah, blah, blah. It was just amazing. But then her daughter husband died while they were on their mission, and he was struggling with a disease. It wasn't a surprise. It's a little bit of a surprise, but he was going downhill. But the way her daughter was treated when her husband died was it was a heart-wrenching podcast. It was one of my favorites to do. And her story is just beautiful. And I think it's eye-opening. They both left the church, but they haven't left the church angry. They've left the church hurt and traumatized and sad that it ended up the way it was. And I just think that's so important to remember that, we don't all leave like me, where I'm like, what? You lied. There's other people that have left because they were just hurt. And so, yeah, I would love to interview some more people like that they're not angry, but they're just sad that
thank you.
Things turned out like that. But yeah.
Well, I try to do show notes where I post links. What was the name of the episode? Do you remember?
Oh, it was with Jean Brody and her daughter. I can't remember which one it was. I'll see if I can find it and I'll send it to you.
Okay. I can find it probably.
Yeah. Jean and her daughter. It wasn't that long ago.
Okay.
We were still in Arizona, so it was probably in June when I did it. But yeah, it was absolutely beautiful. Her daughter is amazing, just lovely people. But yeah, that would be fabulous. I appreciate that. Yeah. And it was fun to do. I did a cult. What's the cults of consciousness?
I can't think of her name either.
Yeah, Shalise. That was fun. That was really fun to do. And
you've been making the rounds. I've seen you over on Rebecca's channel, and then you're on, I don't even know how to say his name, Mormon News Roundup.
Yeah, D-Vase is a kick. He is so funny.
Yeah.
I told him, I said, I'm listening to you. People think I must be one of these schizophrenics on the street because I got my earbuds in, but you can't see them because of my hair. And I'm laughing walking through the grocery store. So yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, it's been so fun. Yeah. I love the people that I've met. It's my poor husband. I said, it's your turn now because I went to all of his business conferences and traveled. When he would travel for business, I would go with him and I would stand next to him. Like, do I have to listen to Crane talk for another 5 hours? I don't care what Crane you just bought, And so now he's going with me and I'm sitting there. We're all talking about podcasts and ex-Mormon, blah, blah, blah. And he's just like, what are you guys talking about? I'm like, it's your turn. So yeah, it's so fun. Great people, fabulous people. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for taking the time, and everyone can head over.
Thanks for having me on. This has been so fun.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. So anyway, have a great night.
Good night.